Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so lovely to have you all here. This is our 46th webinar in the CAQDAS Networking Project webinar series, and I'll send the link to the past webinars to you shortly in the chat. My name's Sarah Bullock, and I work at the CAQDAS Networking Project, which is based in the department at the University of Surrey in Social Sciences. With me today is Associate Professor Christina Silva. She's the director of the CAQDAS Networking Project, and she's our speaker for today. Welcome, everybody here. It's lovely to have you with us. Just before we get going, a few new initiatives from the CAQDAS Networking Project. We've begun to compile some resources to get the conversation going around the use of AI in qualitative data analysis. And these pages are really designed to be a repository for thoughtful pieces around the use of AI. And we are really keen to hear from you all if you come across really good quality, thoughtful resources around these issues. So do have a look at those pages, and I'll send the link to them in the chat shortly. We have also got quite a lot of activity at the moment on our CAQDAS blog. So I invite you to have a look at those. And also, if you have suggestions of things that you would like to write about on our CAQDAS blog, please do contact us. We're always very excited to have others contribute. We also have some methods events and additional webinars coming up soon. So the link there sends you to our pages for upcoming short courses and webinars, and I'll share those with you in the chat as well once Christina gets going. So I'm going to introduce Christina and her webinar for us today. So Christina has been using and teaching qualitative data analysis software packages for well over 20 years and has taught thousands of researchers from all over the world. And she leads and directs the CAQDAS Networking Project at the University of Surrey. And she's also director of Qualitative Data Analysis Services Limited, which undertakes research and provides training, analysis and consultancy services for organizations and research teams. She's a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences as well. Christina has expertise in all the major computer-assisted qualitative data analysis packages and is really interested in the relationship between qualitative and mixed methodology and technology. Over the years, Christina has written many publications about CAQDAS, including the book Using Software in Qualitative Research, a step-by-step guide with Anne Lewins, and Qualitative Analysis using Atlas TI Max QDA in Vivo, the 5-level QDA method, which she wrote with Nicholas Wolff. Most recently, Christina has turned her attention to the really pressing issue of AI in qualitative data analysis and has been collaborating with a wide range of researchers and practitioners around the world to consider implications and best practice in this really fast evolving field. And today we're going to have the pleasure of hearing her thoughts on AI, critical thinking and reflexivity. And I'm really looking forward to it, Christina. So whilst Christina's speaking, please just post any questions or comments that you've got in the chat, and I'll collate those and we'll put those to Christina after the talk. And if there's more questions that we have time to answer, then perhaps Christina will answer those separately for us as well. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'll hand the floor over to you now, Christina. Thanks so much for this session.
Fabulous, Sarah. Thank you for that introduction. It's great to be here and to see some familiar faces and names on the list, as well as some new names, which is always great. So thank you very much. As Sarah said, I have been thinking about AI and the implications on the field of qualitative research, and particularly our practice, for a number of years. In doing that, I have been gathering some data from the people that I meet along the way to find out what they think about AI. And I'm very interested to do the same with you today as well. So in a moment, I'm going to post a little questionnaire. In fact, it's just one question to start us off with. I'm very interested to hear whether you're skeptical about the use of AI for qualitative data analysis. Maybe you're worried about some of the potential dangers, or maybe you're really keen. Maybe you're an advocate of these technologies and you're excited by the possibilities for the practice of qualitative data analysis. Or maybe you're somewhere in between. Maybe you're unsure. Maybe one of the reasons that you're here with us today is that you feel like you need to know a little bit more before you take an informed decision. So just to answer that question, if you don't mind clicking on the link that I've just posted into the chat, and just take a couple of seconds, hopefully it will take. If you can put your answer in the link, then we can see everybody's answers coming in as we go. And I will add those to the repository of researchers' thoughts as we go. So I'm just going to bring up here your responses. Let me just make that slightly bigger, so we can see. I always love this. You can see people's answers coming in. We've got quite a big spread across my different categories of people. A few people really excited. Some skepticism in the room as well. Some of you a little bit, some of you very skeptical. Okay, really interesting to hear or to see those answers. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that. Let's just have a quick think about how that compares with previous responses. So as Sarah mentioned, I've been doing quite a lot of webinars, workshops and things, and this is the cumulative results from the same question that you've just answered over the last couple of years from many dozens, more than 100, I think, responses. So not dissimilar to what you were showing, but a little bit, you had a little bit more of a spread here today, the 29 of you who've answered that question. What I've also done along the way is I've asked people set the same question at the end of the session. And what I've been finding is that after we've had a session, there's quite a lot of movement in terms of feelings about the use of AI after spending some time discussing it. So here you can see the results from the same people historically and how that's changed over time. So this is really interesting to me because one of the things that I've observed is that there's quite a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation around in terms of what is possible with AI and qualitative data analysis. I see lots and lots of incorrect information circulating online. So one of the things that we like to do at the CAQDAS Networking Project through all of these different events that we run that Sarah mentioned earlier is to open up awareness and talk about these issues in a number of ways. And that's one of the purposes of my webinar today. Okay, so what is the project that I'm speaking to? So I'm involved in an ongoing project, which I'm entitling Generative-AI Critical Thinking and Reflexivity in the Practice of and the Teaching and Learning About Qualitative Analysis. As a teacher, I'm very interested in how we go about teaching these tools as well as how we go about using them. So there are two kind of research questions around this work. One is the first one is really what I'm going to be speaking to predominantly today. So my focus today is on the use of generative AI within dedicated CAQDAS packages in relation to critical thinking and reflexivity. And the core question that I want to open up and think about is whether generative AI hinders or helps critical thinking and reflexivity when we do qualitative analysis. And as you can see from the previous slide, that's just speaking to one of the research questions. Later on, hopefully I'll do another webinar about the teaching and learning side of things. Okay, I think it's really important to talk a little bit about definitions. So just to be very clear, generative AI tools for qualitative data analysis, there are a number of genres Sarah mentioned the pages on our website, and there we have 4 genres, okay? And it's really important to realize that there are a variety of different definitions of artificial intelligence, and that speaks to these different genres. Today, I'm focusing on the integrations of generative AI, so the AI that leans on large language models, the integrations of those tools or those capabilities into established CAQDAS packages. And today I'm going to give you some examples from 3 of the 5 established CAQDAS packages that have started to integrate generative AI. So we're going to focus on Atlas TI, Max QDA, and NVivo, but some of these capabilities are also now available in Qualcoda and WordStat. Okay, in terms of definitions as well, we need to think about what does critical thinking and reflexivity mean. So critical thinking, this is a broad definition from the Merriam-Webster encyclopedia, where they define critical thinking as applying reason and questioning assumptions to solve problems, to evaluate information, and to discern biases. Okay, and another definition from the American Psychological Association Dictionary of Psychology is that critical thinking is a form of directed, problem-focused thinking in which the individual tests ideas or possible solutions for errors and drawbacks. And they claim that it's essential, critical thinking, to such activities as examining the validity of hypotheses or interpreting the meaning of research results. And of course, in qualitative research, we're very much interested in the interpretation of meaning. Okay, so what I'm thinking about is how, whether or not the use of generative AI for qualitative analysis will help or hinder those kinds of activities. In terms of definitions, I'm sure you're all well aware of reflexivity and the importance of that in many purist, particularly qualitative approaches. I like to draw on some of the older definitions here. So reflexivity entails the researcher being aware of their effect on the process and outcomes of research, based on the premise that knowledge cannot be separated from the knower. So we as researchers are instruments of the analysis, and that in the social sciences there is only interpretation, so nothing speaks for itself. And that is layered up here by a definition from Paulus et al. Much more recently in an article around qualitative research and technology, who describe reflexive practice as an iterative process that requires holistically and deeply examining all aspects of the research design alongside its consequences and outcomes. And this definition is really important when we're thinking about the role of any kind of technology, because it's really important that to remember always that the tools that we use have consequences on our practices. Okay, so I'm using a combination of those kinds of definitions to frame my thinking around the research questions. Okay, before I talk about the project in more detail, I think it's important to give you a little bit of background. So when generative AI came into our qualitative space, which basically happened after ChatGPT was released in November 2022, there were many disruptions in terms of how we were thinking about these things, and many realities of what was actually happening, which I just want to reflect on very briefly. So you may have seen in the past the Gartner hype cycle, which relates to the introduction of new technologies. When they say that after there's a new technology, a technology trigger, there's often a lot of inflated expectations. Everybody gets very excited, and then that goes down as people realize how the technology actually works. There's a disillusionment process, and then that settles down after a period of time into what they call the plateau of productivity. And this idea was taken forward in a session that I attended, I don't know when, 9 months ago or something now, by Ipsos, who took that idea, actually using a slightly different curve, but the same sort of principle in relation to what happened when we started thinking about ChatGPT. There was this kind of, wow, ChatGPT can do all of these wonderful things. And then as people started to use it a little bit more, there was a little bit of a down curve. Hang on, what's actually happening? What's it actually doing? Oh, right, it can only be used in certain ways. So they really took that idea of this hype cycle and put that into context with the experiences that people had with using ChatGPT. So as our knowledge of ChatGPT and other tools that are drawing on large language models, then things started to change. So that's a really useful thing to think about. So I also wanted to share with you my initial gut reactions. So having worked in this field of computer-assisted qualitative analysis for many years, then my initial gut reactions were a little bit different from that standard hype cycle. And here mine was slightly the other way around. So when ChatGPT was first released, I had a little bit of a horror moment. So my cycle went right down initially, and then I started to play with it and think about it, and then I started to realize how it may be potentially used within my work. So I just wanted to share with you that the way that I engaged in the developments was quite different from that standard hype cycle. And I think it's really important to reflect on our gut feelings towards these new technologies as well. So be really interested to hear any of your reflections on that later on. I also noticed very quickly, as I was observing what was happening in this space, that there was a lot of what I called in a blog post fairly early on in 2023, a lot of bandwagoning. So a lot of people kind of jumping on the bandwagon, talking about how wonderful AI was and how everything was being revolutionized. And a lot of what Paulus and Morone called discursive construction. So a lot of discourses flying around the place in terms of qualitative AI. And I just want to reflect on that in terms of NVivo specifically here, because I mentioned earlier that AI has lots of different definitions, and it was really interesting to see the changes in the NVivo website shortly afterwards. So this is what we were being told about the tools available in NVivo. And then between the 8th and the 17th of October 2023, so almost a year after ChatGPT was released, nothing had changed in terms of the functionality of NVivo, but suddenly we were being told that the tools that previously hadn't been labeled AI were now being labeled AI, even though none of the tools had actually changed. And I think that's a very powerful example of how discourses and how things are presented to us have an effect on how we consume or think about those tools. And that is reflected in many of the websites of some of the different packages. So here are some examples. I can share these slides with you later on if you want to study them in more detail. But we're being told by lots of different products. Coloop is a new tool that has come onto the market since large language models became accessible to researchers. And Atlas TI are also talking about how researchers can now do their analysis a lot more quickly since we have these new technologies. CAQDAS is a little bit more, what's the word? Not quite so dramatic in terms of the implications of using these tools. And I think those discourses are really, really important. And that is shared by this article, which is a really important article, I think, for people to read if you're interested in these things. Paulus and Morone talk about the discursive dilemmas that we're now seeing in how these new tools are being presented to us. So I think that's really, really important context in terms of how we engage with and use these kinds of tools. Okay, so in terms of my own work, very suddenly after ChatGPT, all anyone wanted to talk to me about was AI. Okay, and so that became the new tool to be talking about and learning about very, very quickly. But there was also quite a strong backlash from some quarters of the qualitative community around the use of these tools. And in terms of critical thinking specifically, we've seen some articles appearing which say that AI does enhance critical thinking, and also that it doesn't. So there's a big sort of dilemma or contradictory evidence appearing in the field. These two examples here are coming from higher education contexts. In the qualitative data analysis space, there are many advocates, including Kukartson Radeka and Susanna Frieser, who talk about how AI is really, really useful for qualitative analysis. But then there are lots of qualitative commentators who are very, very skeptical, primarily around the ethical issues of using AI, either in terms of how the AI is developed. So Janet Salmons, I've spelt her name wrong there. I apologize. I'll have to change that. Janet Salmons is very concerned about the development of the models themselves. And Helen Cara, who some of you I'm sure will know, posted something last week around the same sort of issue and talked about why she hasn't and won't be using AI for qualitative analysis. So there's big divisions in the qualitative community around the impact of the use of these tools. My focus is as much on the process as the outcome of the use of these tools. So I'm just as interested in how they're changing or influencing the way we might do qualitative analysis as they are on affecting the outcome of our work. Okay, so that's a little bit of background about the disruptions. In terms of the realities, I started realizing that I needed to engage with generative AI as a potential tool for qualitative data analysis, even though initially I was quite horrified by what ChatGPT was claiming to do and the implications that might have on qualitative analysis. I realized very quickly from a pragmatic point of view that we need to equip students and researchers with the capacity to make informed choices about whether they should be using these tools or not, and if they choose to use them, that they should be using them appropriately. Okay, and for me, that really changes or emphasizes the A in the CAQDAS acronym, the first A, which is the assisted. And so that has very much started to take on a new, different meaning from how we've been thinking about that in the past. So something that's going on in the background is the idea of when are tools ever just tools, and do we now have to rethink what a qualitative data analysis tool actually means for our practice? Okay, so that's a little bit of background leading into why I'm doing this. So let me talk a little bit about the actual project. So over the last couple of years, and as an ongoing thing, I'm gathering all kinds of data from the workshops and other events that I'm doing around this topic, including observational field notes, open and closed survey responses in similar and in addition to the ones that you've just filled out for me, results of my own analytic experiments with different tools in different contexts, discussions that I have with people, and all sorts of comments from other places. And as I mentioned, I've done dozens and dozens of workshops since April 2023 around these topics, including more than 175 participants. I've also been gathering auto-ethnographic data, so undertaking my own qualitative analysis, as I always do, using a variety of different tools in different projects. And the two or the one principal project I'm going to be talking about today is the one that I call the Past Moments Project, and I will explain that project to you very shortly. In terms of the analysis, those of you who've read any of my work will know that I like to make a distinction between the strategies, our analytic strategies, what we plan to do with our analysis, and how we go about doing that in terms of tactics. So for my strategies, in the broader project, I'm drawing on reflexive thematic analysis, but I'm focusing on different stages of engagement with learning about and using these generative AI tools. And I'm very much thinking about how do people engage and think about these tools before they use them, as they're learning to use them, and after they have used them. So there's those kind of 3 stages. And I'm also very much informed by Walcott's work, who distinguishes between description, analysis, and interpretation. And I'm going to be focusing on the description side of things today in the examples that I'm giving you. And I will be drawing on 3 core AI tools within those established CAQDAS packages, which are AI summarization, prompt-based querying, and AI-assisted coding. And I'm very much thinking about how we can integrate those tools with the human tasks of analysis. Okay, so the example comes from my podcast, and I have done 12 or 13 different podcast episodes over the last couple of years. And at the end of each podcast episode, I ask my guests the same 2 questions. The first question is this one here. If you had to pinpoint one moment that had changed the course of computer-assisted qualitative analysis over the past 30 years, what would that be? And that is the data that I am working with in this example today. We also have the future needs question, and I'll come back and talk about that in a moment. So in terms of the data and the analysis, what I did was I took the responses of these 13 guests in the first 12 episodes. You can see their names there. Their responses to that question, and I analysed that data myself, using a software, but as a human analysis, not using any AI. And as I was doing that, I started to think about, okay, how would this look if I used AI rather than doing it only myself? So after I'd written that blog post, and you can go and read that blog post giving you the human analysis that I did, after I had done that human analysis, I went back to these people and I asked them, would they mind if I did this little experiment trying to redo the analysis using generative AI? And all of them, apart from Janet Salmons, said that they would be very happy for me to put their data into AI to do that experiment. Janet didn't want me to, so I absolutely haven't done that. And I think it's really, really important to remember that the participants need to provide their informed consent before we use these tools. And I'm quite horrified by some of the things I see online about students and researchers just putting data into ChatGPT, not thinking about what the participants who may not have consented to them doing that might think about it. So that's a really important ethical issue. So for the analysis I'm talking about today, I haven't included Janet Salmon's responses because she doesn't want her data being used for AI. So what I'm going to show you now is to talk about the first topic here, or the first action here, when I read each past moment's discussion in turn and summarised the response. This list here is the stage process of my human analysis that I did. But before I go any further, I just want to ask this question. Is this comparison a meaningful one? So what we've been seeing recently is many publications which have been comparing AI-driven, assisted, accomplished, or augmented, different words people use, but comparing AI-assisted analysis with human analysis. And here are just a few examples. And that's exactly what I was doing, okay? And what happens typically is that humans do the analysis first, and then they ask the question that I also started asking: does AI do a good enough job or a better job than I could do as a human myself? And I started to realize as I was doing this myself, I started to think about, okay, why are we doing this? Okay, and one of the reasons is that in order to start using AI for our own analysis, we need to learn to trust the AI before we can use it for a new project. And that's why we have so many of these studies that compare it. But I'm not going to answer this question now, but I want you to have in your mind this question here. Is this comparison a helpful one? Comparing an analysis that you've already done yourself with the AI doing the same analysis again. Just have that in your mind and just be reflecting on that as I go through the rest of my presentation. So as a reminder, what I did as a human was I read each discussion around that past moments question and I summarized those responses. And I happened to use CAQDA for this task in the first place, just because of the comparative way of seeing summaries, which I'll show you in a moment. But here you can see my summaries. So initially you have this column here. Each column here is each episode and each person's response here. And I read their response. So here you can see the beginnings of what Nigel Fielding said to me in answer to this question. And down here is my summary. And you can also see the AI summaries that I did later. But one of the reasons, or the main reason, that I used CAQDA rather than any of the other tools to do this is because CAQDA allows me to see my summaries side by side in this comparative way. So in case you're wondering why I chose to use CAQDA rather than NVivo or anything else initially, that's the reason. But let's think about what that looks like. So here, as an example, this is my summary of Trina Paulus's response to the past moments question. And this is what I wrote myself, no AI involved. And you can read that. So we haven't got time to read them in detail later on today, sorry. You can read it later on if you like. When I subsequently asked the AI to do it, okay, you can get a long or a short summary. If you compare the long and short summary, you will start to see that they're actually very similar in many respects. So what I now need to start thinking about is, okay, the AI can summarize, okay? Is it helpful for my critical thinking and reflexivity if I have the AI do the summaries rather than me doing the summaries? That's my overarching question, isn't it? What is gained? What is lost? So I'm now going to share with you some extracts from my analysis journal where I was writing my reflections in answer to this question as I was doing this task. So here you can see that I said, okay, it's super quick and easy to get the AI summaries in the summary grid. I was impressed by what it generated. Both the long and short versions were really good. But then I got to thinking, how would I feel about this if I'd only done the AI summary, i.e. if I wasn't comparing what the AI produced with what I had already done? Okay, and that's the critical thing that I want us to be thinking about. And then I wrote this. It relates partly into the importance of the nature of the task. So my past moments analysis involved a small number, 12, of very short extracts of a much larger podcast interview. Okay, my current task was a descriptive one. What's going on here? So my analytic questions, as I'm doing the AI human comparison, was what I'm gaining and what I'm losing. Okay, so what I'm gaining from the AI doing these summaries are good quality descriptive summaries at speed. I actually think that the summaries that the AI wrote are better than the ones that I wrote myself. And they were certainly much, much quicker. Okay, you just press a button and it does it in a matter of moments. Whereas when I did it myself, I had to read them, I had to think about them, I had to write them. And I also remember having to control myself to stay at the descriptive level when I was writing the summaries, not bringing in my knowledge of the guests and so on, which of course the AI doesn't have. So I seem to be gaining quite a lot. I'm gaining good quality descriptions or summaries, and it's happening super quickly, much, much quicker than I could do it myself. So what am I losing? And this is the key thing. I'm losing in-depth engagement with the data and comparative thinking about each guest's response as I read and summarize it myself. So if I get the AI to do the summaries, even though the quality is really good, maybe better, even though it's happening really quickly, by having the AI doing it, I'm losing all of the accumulation of knowledge around my data that I would have by spending the time. So this is a big loss in some projects, especially if you've got a lot more data, what I'm calling the loss of accumulated latent understanding of meaning. So what does this mean in terms of critical thinking and reflexivity? So for me, having the AI do the summaries changes fundamentally how I'm engaging with the data. Okay, I'm not able to think about the implications of what I'm reading in the moment, like I would if I was summarizing it myself. I'm not accumulating that understanding of each guest's comments, and principally, I'm not able to take that forward to the next stage of analysis. So pressing the button and getting the AI to do the summary, it might be a great summary, it might be happening very quickly, but I haven't gained any accumulation of understanding through that process. So I'm losing quite a lot by doing that. So then I need to ask myself, well, okay, does that matter? Does it matter that I haven't got all of that? Okay. I concluded that for a descriptive task like the current one, it might only matter a lot if I didn't already know the data well. I did the podcast interviews. I checked the transcripts, and that involved listening and watching to the podcast again. I was already pretty familiar with the data before I started the summarization process. So you could argue that it doesn't really matter that much by not doing the summarization myself, because I've already got that knowledge anyway, because I'm already quite familiar with the data. And that would be very different from if I was working with data that I hadn't already become familiar with. So my conclusion was that the loss of critical engagement with the data when I'm already familiar with it, especially when the extracts are short, is outweighed by the time saved when the task is a descriptive one. However, it could be a significant problem if I wasn't already familiar with the data. So what I'm saying here is that the answer to this question, is it helpful, is it not helpful, isn't just to do with the tool itself, it's to do with the context of the project that we are working with. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer, if you like. So what I'm saying about AI summarization is that what is gained is time, maybe quality if we think that the summaries are good, but what we're losing is that accumulation of understanding. And what I'd like you to do as you take away your own thinking from this webinar is to relate that to these definitions of critical thinking and reflexivity. If we hold these things, if we prize them in our process, then we need to really think carefully about how shortcutting our work by not doing it ourselves, having the AI do it, is affecting these things. And as I said, I think the answer may be quite different for different types of project. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so let's move across to the next stage of the work. So after I'd done my summaries in my human process, I then reviewed the summaries and I coded them into initial codes. Then I retrieved the coded segments together with my summary and I recoded. So I went through an iterative coding process. The end result was I had 14 codes in 4 categories. So this is what those codes and categories were from my human analysis. And you can have a nice visualization here of the codes. The bigger the code label, the more frequently it occurred in my data. And on the blog post, which you can read afterwards if you want to, I've got my original definitions of each category and each code in a big long table that you can review. Okay, so that was the end result of my coding process, which of course took quite a long time of refining. So I now want to think about, okay, how would generative AI coding do this job? In Atlas TI, NVivo and CAQDAS at the moment, there's a variety of different types of coding that can be facilitated by AI. So I'm going to talk about Atlas TI first of all, which has automatic AI coding and intentional AI coding. This is the result of the automatic AI coding on the same data that I had coded myself. And I had 14 categories in know, 14 codes in 4 categories, I think, didn't I? And here, when I ask Atlas TI just to code the data without telling it anything else, it comes up with 72 codes in 23 categories, which is a lot more than I had. Okay, I can see the codes it wants to apply, and I can make choices about whether to apply them. Okay, and then I have to do quite a lot of work at looking at those codes and categories and reviewing them. And I want you to think about whether this is helping or hindering, even whether this is actually coding in the way that we think of coding in qualitative methodology. You can see here that a lot of the codes that the automated AI is generating in Atlas TI have only got one piece of data at them. Okay, so we have to ask our question, is this actually coding, or is this just tagging descriptive content? Okay, so for me, this kind of functionality in Atlas TI, it has a place potentially, but really it's more of a familiarization kind of activity rather than a coding activity in the way that we would typically understand coding. So what does this look like in terms of the actual result? So here you've got a result of my human coding from one extract from Trina Paulus's response. And you can see here that I've got overlapping segments coded. When we compare that with the same segment of data from the Atlas TI coding, you can see that it's much less nuanced, both in terms of the size of the segments that are coded and the overlaps, and also in the naming of the codes. So I also defined my codes as I went along the process, but there's no definitions occurring in this type of coding. But it's not the only type of coding we have in Atlas TI. We also have intentional AI coding, when you can specify your intentions to the AI. So I told the AI what I wanted it, what my intentions were. I gave it 2 intentions here. So identify key moments and identify aspects relating to collaboration, opening up, etc. These terms here, in fact, I think that's in the next slide, relate to the categories that I'd already identified. So I was using the results of my previous human coding to direct the AI. Okay, and I would like you to think about whether that's makes the comparison a useful one. What Atlas TI does is it takes my intentions and turns them into questions, and then says, okay, we're going to use this question to look at the data and come up with code categories. Okay, so this initially looks to be much more useful around my intentions. But this time I've got fewer categories, but way more codes, even though I gave it intentions. So let's just pick that out a little bit and think about what's happening here. So this is the result, and the 5 categories are represented by these green circles here, and you can see all the coded segments, and you can see that there's some connections between the categories and so on. But what we've got here on the list is that the idea of collaboration is being repeated in many different categories. And that's one of the reasons why we've got so many codes, is that the collaboration code isn't just one code, it's many codes which are feeding into multiple categories. So there's lots of overlap, there's lots of duplication there, okay, which is one of the reasons why we've got so many codes. And the same is happening over here, even though these are not exactly the same codes. Rigorous analysis, thoroughness, and thorough analysis, we might, if we were doing the human coding, we might bring those together and treat them as one rather than 3 separate codes. And I've got another example here, tool efficiency and efficient analysis. So even though we've giving it intentions, it's still proliferating the codes. So what happens if we decide, okay, let's ask the AI to suggest codes to us rather than actually do the coding? And that can happen in a number of ways. In CAQDA, you can ask for suggestions. And here I've got some examples. And in this type of functionality inside MaxQDA, it's not doing the coding, it's just looking at my past moments data and suggesting potential codes that I can then use to go and code my data if I want to. And I want you to notice that I did this twice, once at the end of January and once a few days later, and I get different results. And that's something that's really important to understand about generative AI. It's a language model, remember, not a knowledge model. So it is going to give you different responses when you ask the same question a second or third time. So these are just ideas that I could take forward. No coding is actually happening in this example. In NVivo, I can get something similar, and I can ask for coding to happen. But here, with exactly the same data, I've got 3 suggestions rather than the numerous suggestions that I had from MaxQDA. So depending which tool you are using is also going to have an effect. But what's quite different between MaxQDA and NVivo is the examples here underneath are not actual extracts from the data. They are summaries of what was said in the material, whereas in NVivo, these examples here for my technological advancement code that the AI was suggesting, these are actually extracts from the data. So it's quite different the way that these tools work in these different products. This is what the coding looks like in NVivo if you choose to do it. And you can see here that it hasn't necessarily coded a meaningful chunk of data as a result of that coding. But you can get coding done from those segments if you want to. The final way of coding that I'm going to talk about today is called AI-directed coding in MaxQDA. When you give it a code, so here my example is changed thinking practice, and that was one of the codes that I came up with in my human analysis, and you give the AI a definition, and then you ask the AI to go and look at one document. Okay, I put all of the past moments segments into one document, or you can do it on the code. And it looks at those extracts and does the coding. And so this is very, very different from the coding that I talked about in Atlas TI earlier, because it's one code that you create and you give a definition for, and it then looks at the data in relation to that code. But what's nice, I think, here is it gives you an explanation. So here it's saying, okay, I think that this segment here relates to the code, and this is the explanation provided for each code application. So that's quite a different kind of way of going about it. But remember, my comparison was comparing my human analysis with the AI analysis. So let's have a look at this example. So this is looking at that one code and comparing what I coded to that code and what the AI in MaxQDA did. Okay, so my coding is this row across here. Okay, and the AI coding for the same code is this row here. So there's only one of my podcast guests, Eli Lieber, where both of us, me and the AI, thought that code occurred, but the data that I coded in comparison to the AI is different. So it is doing a different kind of job in this example, despite the fact that I gave it the definition that I'd come up with. It didn't find the same data. So we have to think then, what are we gaining? What are we losing when we do this kind of coding? Okay, and hopefully it's very clear to you that it depends on the type of AI coding that we do, the answer to that question. But I want you to think about whether we're actually saving any time. There's lots of checking and validating that needs to happen. Okay, and there's also a question about quality. So when I talked about summarization, I suggested that we were gaining time and quality. And I think it looks quite different when we use the AI coding at the moment. What are we losing? We're losing the focus. So we've got, even if we tell the AI to focus the coding around our intentions, it's a very different kind of activity from the focused activity that we might do when we're coding ourselves. And we're also losing the associations. What do I mean by that? I mean this kind of thing. The overlapping coding that I showed you that I'd done myself allows me to think about the connections and the associations between my codes and my categories. And that's something that's not happening in the same way when we're using AI. So we have to think about, okay, how does the use of AI coding change what coding looks like or feels like when we do an analysis?
2 more minutes, Christina. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, so I'm going to jump over there. I'm going to very, very quickly say a couple of things about the third and final AI activity, which is what some people call prompt-based AI querying, and other people call it conversational analysis, which is when we can use a chatbot-like interface, so something similar to ChatGPT, for asking questions and receiving answers within our data. So I'll just show you an example here from Atlas TI. At the moment, we can do this in Atlas TI and MaxQDA. So I asked Atlas TI this question: what do participants say about the impact of the development of computer-assisted analysis tools over the last 30 years? And it gives me quite a lot of results. So what I then did was I compared those with my coding, okay? And there's not a huge amount of differences in some respects. So the ones I've got highlighted here on red are also coming up in various places over here in Atlas TI. Okay, the ones that are not highlighted are not. But Atlas TI also came up with this idea of impact on teaching and learning, which I didn't have a code for. So there are some differences in the tool. So let's also think about whether I missed anything. Okay, so here's the segment here in the background that the AI wanted, or where that the AI is looking at in terms of those conversations around teaching, which I hadn't coded. But it's interesting that Atlas TI didn't code that to a code around teaching, even though when you ask it the question in the chat interface, it does come up with it. So this is a very, very, very different way of engaging with the data. Here you've got an example from MaxQDA. And as I said, I can share the slides so you can have a look and make the comparisons yourself if you want to. But the highlighted examples do illustrate that some of what I created in the subcodes were contained within the text, but gathered at the AI for each topic. But this is not coding, yes? When the AI is giving us a response, it's not the same as coding. So making a comparison with what I coded with this new way of engaging with data is not really a meaningful comparison, because this is not coding, this is giving us responses. But it needs to be an iterative process when you're using this new chat-based conversation with your data. Okay, so I'm just going to jump over there and just finish off by going back to this question about whether this comparison is meaningful. As I started engaging with this comparison, I started to realize more and more that the comparison isn't a meaningful comparison. I understand why lots of people are doing this. I was doing it myself. I thought I needed to compare what the AI produced with what I produced. But these are completely different ways of going about analysis. And what I've now decided is it's a much more useful comparison, not to compare the AI with data I've already analysed myself, but to do an AI analysis on data that I haven't already analysed myself. That would be a much more fair comparison, because otherwise I'm using all of that accumulated knowledge to direct the AI. And that then means that, of course, the AI is going to come up with different things than it would if I didn't have that accumulated knowledge of having done the analysis already. So my plan is to redo this experiment using that second question. So rather than the past moments, the second question that I've asked everyone. All right, I know Sarah's going to stop me in a minute, so I'll just bring up this final slide here. What does all this mean for critical thinking and reflexivity? So for me, this highlights the idea of what I call interpretive intelligence, okay, in qualitative data analysis. And many people are very importantly and very correctly, accurately, in my opinion, reminding us always that generative AI is not intelligent. Okay, it's a language model, not a knowledge model. Okay, and even though the AI may generate some responses in really nicely written prose, it is not intelligent in the way that we are as humans. So we need to be thinking about AI not in terms of the AI doing the critical thinking and reflexivity for us, but about how it can facilitate humans with these activities. And I think that the way that MaxQDA and NVivo refer to their AI tools as assistants is really important in that sense. So just to finish up, there is no one size fits all answer, in my opinion, to this question of whether it can assist critical thinking and reflexivity. It depends on the role of the AI in the process. It depends on the stage and the purpose of the AI. So it's not an either or question. It's an idea of integrating what is useful, and that will inform how we can get the most useful contribution from the AI. Okay, I know I've gone way over my time, Sarah. I apologize.
You're all right. Thank you so much, Christina, for taking us through that project. I'm excited to have heard a little bit more about it. I've been aware that you've been working on it. So thank you for sharing a little bit more about that with us. We have got a question from Sarah, one of the participants here. She says, I'm very glad to hear that you're concerned about the ethical considerations, but I'm curious how you approach conversations with partners and clients that may still be really excited about AI capabilities without considering its downfalls.
So I think that's about explaining how the AI works and what the AI can do and what it can't do, and also in terms of our data, what actually happens to our data. So I haven't spoken about that today, but those pages on our website have got lots of information around those kinds of things. So if I was working with a client, for example, I would be really keen to ensure that we had those conversations about data security and privacy and informed consent. I think the potential use of AI really changes what informed consent actually means for us as qualitative researchers. And I'm not convinced that everybody is thinking about that in the way that would be the most appropriate way to think about it. There's lots of people who are like, oh, well, it's okay. They said I could interview them, so it's okay if I do AI analysis. I don't agree with that. I think that's not right. I know myself, I was in a session recently when they asked us questions and then started live analysing what the responses we gave without telling us that they were going to do that. And I didn't feel like that was an appropriate thing to do at all. They hadn't told me that that's what they were going to do. And being on the other end of it, I think, made me realise that more and more. It's not a simple thing. It's a very different kind of tool from the tools that we've previously been using. So I think it's really, the ethics thing is really, really important. And personally, I wouldn't use AI for certain types of data or certain types of project or even certain types of task. And I might for others. And I think that's that. So it's not a blanket issue. It's a very nuanced issue. So that's absolutely important, that question.
Yeah, so that means that I suppose that the other question that's just come in from the chat here, is it ethical in the world of academia to depend solely on the analysis of qualitative data by using AI-powered tools? I'm assuming that your answer to that, in your opinion, is no, it's not. Because
so for me, it's
very much on the context.
Yeah, there's two things. It's to do with whether you see the AI as replacing us or assisting us. And so I would say as a replacement, absolutely not. But as an assistant, maybe, depending on the context.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Thank you. There are a couple of other comments that participants have made around One about it being a very honest, yours being a very honest reflection on the use of AI and critical thinking and reflexivity, and that the participant was encouraged that not all qualitative research requires Gen AI. And then another participant also voicing some concern about the use of AI for coding, but perhaps a bit less for summarizing. So yeah, different contexts in which we might or might not use it. A final reflection for me, which takes us back to the beginning of your presentation and this Gartner hype cycle. And my thought was just that actually over time, that plateau doesn't really necessarily look flat because things keep changing, don't they? So even within the plateau, we then see new hypes and new troughs as things are going along. And that's one of the things I think that's so challenging about all of this, is that it's not enough to just be on top of it at one moment in time, because things are looking so different from month to month. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a really important point. Yeah.
Okay, well, we are coming to the end of our time together here. So I'm going to replace your share there, Christina, and just point our participants to our next webinar, which is in early April, how to enrich research analysis with interactive documentary design. So looking forward to welcoming you to that if you have a chance to join us at the beginning of April. And finally, just to say thanks so very much for joining us. You will be sent the recording of this webinar shortly in a few days' time, and it will also appear on the list of previous recordings on our website that I shared earlier on. So wishing you all a really great rest of your week, and thanks again for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to be here and spend this time with you. Thanks so much, everybody. And thanks so much, Christina, for sharing your thoughts with us today. Really appreciated that.